We do not have public schools for poor people. It's a strange idea to call it public when your admission is determined by your wallet. Along about 1960, I had been involved in some civil rights stuff, minor things, Catholic Interracial League in Chicago. In early 1962, one of my colleagues called me, a distinguished man who had been asked to study Chicago public schools to see if they were deliberately or by accident racially segregated. It was part of a study by a federal organization, a federal commission that studied a number of cities in the North. The South had been thoroughly studied, they felt, but they knew nothing about urban North and deseg. My only problem was I didn't know anything. I had been to Catholic schools. What am I doing looking at Chicago public schools? So I had to get a quick education on the organization and funding and so forth of public education. I learned some amazing things. I had supposed that public schools were public schools, and that if you lived in one place, they're pretty much the same as the other. But what I was most astonished at the time to discover was the degree of difference in the support of public schools from district to district and within district. I mean financial. It was colossal. I began to think it was my responsibility, at least in my reports, to take a look at all of these school systems around at least a good sample around the country, and say something about them. The most amazing thing was, to me, that school districts were raising most of their money from local property taxes. I had the remarkable good fortune of connecting with two young men, Stephen Dwight Sugarman, still my friend and collaborator, colleague at Berkeley, and his classmate, William Clune. Clune and Sugarman wrote a book for me, which I put my name on, and maybe contributed a little, called Private Wealth and Public Education. We thought that districts ought to be able to make different decisions. The only thing is, they ought to be able to make different decisions about how much tax they bore to raise the same number of dollars. We called district power equalizing. How boring, eh? When we came to California, that idea found its way into a lawsuit called Serrano against Priest. A gentleman from the faculty of UCLA called and said, we've got a lawsuit we're about to file. We have 10 different theories that we're presenting to the court. Do you have anything to add? And what they didn't have was what we had talked about, that is to say, equal effort, tax effort. Equal tax effort means you should produce the same number of dollars per child. The Supreme Court of California, Steve Sugarman and I argued the case in 1971, I guess. And lo and behold, they held for us. That was very exciting because they held for us not only under the California Constitution, which has an equal protection clause, and/or they did as well decide that it violated the federal Constitution, 14th Amendment, due process. Faster than lightning, so people in Texas, San Antonio, filed a lawsuit under this theory in a federal court. Of course, this three-judge court in Texas said, good, yeah, this should all change, and people should be able to get equality, at least, of outcome for their effort. That went to the Supreme Court, and in the end, the idea lost 5-4. Maybe it wasn't so bad, because it meant the states had to examine their own constitutions in 50 different states. There were lawsuits all over the place for the next 40 years on this subject. They're still going on at different levels. And California has held to that root, to that idea of equalizing the power to raise money. You can raise more or less, but you have to make the effort. After Rodriguez against San Antonio, we were more interested by now in something else that we had seen in the structure of public education, or so-called public education, and that was the difference created by the social difference and the economic difference of the parent in a society where you could move to the suburbs. My wife and I and our children moved to a suburb where there was fine public education. Unfortunately, people began to see a connection, or they thought they did, between the rising value of real estate and the rising, much even faster rising imposition of property taxes by local institutions. They were very successful at convincing the people of California that they should pass an initiative, a popular initiative, which ran in 1978, an initiative which would limit the amount of tax that local property owners could actually vote on themselves. Proposition 13. It has made it very difficult for the schools, the public schools around the state, to do anything different from another, or to do anything very fancy. We were blamed partly for Proposition 13 because people thought that somehow the schools, that what we were trying to do was to raise more money for schools, and that is not the case. We thought that should be left up to the people of the districts or of the state or whatever. I wish I had been more persuasive with the unions than I was. I think there are a lot of good people in the unions, teachers' unions, and to show them that life had not come to an end just because people who are poor begin to be able to take care of their own lives and their own children. Extend choice. Give it to everybody. Choice could save a good share of American families, I think, and make America less angry and unhappy with itself. The problem today, I think, much of our society is riddled with the effects of making the family weak. Its independence, its authority, its responsibility, the parents' responsibility for the child, and their ability to carry that responsibility out instead of being frustrated. And schools have contributed to that, in my view, a great deal. If you take a so-called family and strip it of responsibility and authority, you've taken away its dignity and you've taken away its effectiveness as a social good. And this society had better look out for all the ways that we have treated our families who are poor, who deserve authority. We have to make sure that they are not stripped of that dignity.